Good evening, everyone. It is once again Ted the Speed Learner, and tonight we're going to cover the topic of SDRAM versus DDR RAM. I know I covered this over a decade ago, but we're going to expand on what I covered in the first video because some of the information was not only inaccurate, but it was also way too brief. And I wanted to cover a bunch of this with you guys, mainly because you wouldn't know all this stuff. But before I do, I wanted to let you guys know that I have published 5 Kindle books, and I would like for you guys to purchase them. If you are interested in them, let me know. Leave a comment down in the comments below, and I will definitely send you links to the books. Okay, so let's start with a history of computers. In the early days of computers, data had to be retrieved either from paper tape or from magnetic disk. Then the central processing unit, per se, would process this data and store the data either on paper tape or on magnetic disks. Now, if the person operating the computer didn't need the data stored on any media device, he would just tell the computer to print out the data. You could print it up on a big sheet. And if you've ever had a dot matrix printer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's very old technology, and we'll go on. But this kind of data processing was exceedingly slow. First, you had to find the magnetic disk or the paper tape that the source data was stored on. Then you had to install it into the computer. And believe me, on some of those computers, like the ENIAC and the UNIVAC, that was quite a process in itself. Okay? Then you had to tell the computer the location of the media where the data was stored. Okay, because remember, if you're dealing with a magnetic disk or you're dealing with paper tape, it was stored somewhere on the disk, but it wasn't stored on the very edge of it. So you'd say, okay, you had to spin it certain times, and then you could find the data that you were looking for. And that could take up to several minutes, depending on how much data is on those disks or on that paper tape. Yeah, try it with hole punch tape and see what happens to you. Alright? Now, how did the people who created our modern-day computer systems solve this ridiculous problem? Well, they created something called random access memory. The first type of random access memory that they created was called static random access memory. This type of memory used at least 6 transistors to store 1 bit of data. Now, how that was done exactly, I do not know. I'm sure if I did a bit more research, I could probably find out. But anybody like Dorper Systems that wants to expand on that, please do. I'd love to hear about it. Okay. And if I ever get some time, maybe I'll do some exploration on this and present that information to you as well. But hopefully Dorper Systems or D. Lukens 9 or somebody else can actually present that stuff to you, and there you go. Now remember, all these transistors, and later on I'm going to be talking about capacitors themselves, operate off of electrons. Electrons enter into them, they leave them. Get it? Okay. And I did cover that in some previous videos, and I will try as best as I can to leave end screens on this particular video so you can click back to those other videos and you can watch them as well. Okay. Now, I do have a link to a web article that further goes into all this, and I'm going to leave it right down here in the description box below. You can go check that out for yourself. Matter of fact, I have not just one, but I actually have 3 of them. 3 video links. Now, unlike static RAM, dynamic RAM pairs transistors with capacitors. Now, how exactly that's done, I've heard that some dynamic RAM pairs 1 transistor to 1 capacitor, and then there's others that pair like 2 or 3 transistors to 1 capacitor. I'm not exactly sure how all that works. You are more than welcome to research the topic, and like I said, if Dorper Systems or D. Lukens 9 want to elaborate on all this, that'd be fantastic. Okay, I'll let them, or I'll maybe someday find out for myself. Okay, electrons pass through the transistors and are stored on capacitors. But the problem with the capacitors is that over a very short period of time, capacitors leak electrons. So capacitors have to be refreshed constantly. In other words, the transistors have to place more electrons into the capacitors in order for the capacitors to retain their storage of data bits. Okay? Because remember, you have bits and you have bytes, and I explained that in a video a long time ago. The main reason to use dynamic RAM is due to the amount of space used by transistors and capacitors. Okay, you don't need as many transistors on your board if you have capacitors. Dynamic RAM usually pairs, well, from what I understood, and if I'm wrong on this, you could go correct me. As far as I know, usually dynamic RAM will pair a transistor with a capacitor. If that information is incorrect, please let me know. Okay. This eliminates the need to use multiple transistors to store single bits of information. Okay? Now then, I'm going to go ahead, if you want to do some research on this, please feel free. Okay? But at this point, I have to return to the main topic of this video. What is the difference between SDRAM and DDR RAM? Okay. The acronym SDRAM stands for the word Synchronous Dynamic Random Access Memory. As you may have guessed already, we are going to discuss the use of dynamic RAM, which uses a pairing of transistors and capacitors. Okay. And I'm going to leave yet another web article link down below. You can read that for yourself. Okay. Random access memory chips are divided into rows and columns. That's why you will often hear the term CAS latency. The acronym CAS stands for Column Access Strobe. The words column and access basically describe themselves. Obviously, the computer, when using CAS, is trying to access a column of RAM. How a computer accesses those columns is beyond the scope of this particular video, and I really don't know either, so you can do some research on that too. Okay? So, I'm hoping that the information I've presented to you so far will help you find out the information you're looking for. Okay? But what does the word latency mean? This involves an exact period of time. A computer will ask the RAM to store or retrieve data. Okay? The amount of time it takes for the RAM to respond to this request is called a latency. You can read more about this. They've got plenty of articles that will describe this as well. I've actually included a link to that particular part of the discussion right down here in the description box. But none of this information I've provided so far answers our burning question. What is the difference between SDRAM and DDR RAM? It would be wonderful if dynamic RAM worked at the same clock speed as the CPU of your computer. But in the early days of computers, dynamic RAM didn't always work at the same speed as the CPU of a computer. But thanks to SDRAM, these speeds have been synchronized. At this point, you may be asking a burning question. If SDRAM works at the same speed of the CPU, which is the most ideal thing you could ever have, then why would you need DDR RAM at all? Well, here's the answer. If all you were doing was reading a web article or sending emails, then SDRAM would be the only thing you would ever need. But what if you want to listen to a song or watch a video on your computer? These files contain lots of bytes of data. And if they contain lots of bytes, of course they're going to contain tons of bits. Therefore, you would need to send and retrieve lots of data. Okay? And that means you're going to need a faster RAM to keep up with all that. And this is why they invented DDR RAM. Okay? Now, I will leave the acronym of DDR RAM in the description below. Okay? If you're wondering how DDR RAM stores and retrieves so much data, then you're welcome to research the topic by reading a bunch of web articles. And there are a lot of them that will describe all this to you. So you go ahead and check that out. Alright? Why would I tell you any of this? Okay? Because, one, very soon I'm going to present a video entitled Peripheral Component Interface. And hopefully I got that right. If I didn't, you are more than welcome to correct me. But I'm going to present a video about that, and this discussion leads into that. Okay, and the second reason is, have you guys heard the latest about Microsoft? Okay, you remember their wonderful operating system? Well, it has been proposed, but not yet enacted, that instead of buying Microsoft Windows one time and you're done, you would pay a monthly fee to have Microsoft's operating system. You don't pay the fee, your computer doesn't work. How do you like them apples? Now, this has not been implemented yet. It's just something that's been discussed. But you know Microsoft, if they have some brilliant idea, they might actually try it. Now, for corporations, that might not be such a bad deal, simply for the fact that corporations experience lots of viruses, and they need constant updates to their security. And that would be a good reason for them to pay a monthly fee in order to protect all their computers. However, do you really want to pay a monthly fee to operate your computer? I don't think so. So, that is why I am going to start teaching you guys more and more about computers. I'd like to update my old videos, and more importantly, go more in depth with the material. And that's why we're going to do this. Alrighty. I will tell you more in a future video, so I'd like for you to stay tuned.